When 3 billion people globally and about half of the US watches something, you know there's going to be discourse about it. And unless you live under a rock, you've probably been exposed to at least some discourse about the 2024 Olympics taking place in Paris from July 26th to August 11th. And no shade if you do live under a rock, sometimes I wish I could join.
Who are you people?
Please, internet, release me from your grasp. Some of this discourse involves genuine criticisms of the Olympics, like the fact that the Seine River is full of fecal bacteria like E. coli, and pollutants like PFAS, and has basically been teetering on the edge of being supposedly acceptable for swimming in, depending on weather conditions and the level of wastewater runoff in the river, despite the fact that the French government spent $1.5 billion to clean it up. And there's been plenty of discourse about the fact that there were not one, but two convicted pedophiles participating in the Olympic Games this year. A Dutch volleyball player and an Australian swimming coach, although apparently they both left due to the outrage, but they honestly shouldn't have even been there in the first place. And you may have seen discourse about the fact that athletes who test positive for a virus with a known biosafety level 3 designation, meaning it can cause serious or potentially lethal disease via inhalation, can still compete and freely be around other people. Yikes, that doesn't sound very healthy or health promoting. The way people got to believing the government about how a severe acute respiratory syndrome is actually totally mild is wild, to say the least. And there's been discourse about the fact that the French authorities have been accused of social cleansing of migrants and unhoused people in Paris, and literally kicked people out so that tourists and athletes could stay there without having to look at unhoused people. Just give people homes if you really don't want to see homelessness. It's a really easy solution and it works out to be cheaper overall. And all of that aforementioned discourse makes sense, right? I mean, those are legitimate concerns. And there's also been some really hilarious discourse, like the fact that some French citizens took to social media to threaten that they'd poop in the Seine on June 23rd, the day President Emmanuel Macron and Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo was scheduled to swim in the Seine to prove that it was safe for swimming. That's really funny, especially since it's not even the first French poop-related protest in the past year. I'm just saying, we could probably learn a thing or two from the French. However, some of the other discourse is goofy as hell, and in its goofiness, it reveals some of the problems of our society, namely the culture war that the US has been stoking for a while now. The opening ceremony is debaucherous and gay! The woman boxer is actually a man! So I want to debunk some silly talking points and talk about why this culture war even exists to begin with and why it's getting worse. The answer is, as with most terrible things, is Nazis, eugenics, and economic turmoil. Let's talk about it. 1. Opening ceremony panic. I scoured the internet far and wide, watched the Olympic opening ceremony on NBC on 3 different browsers because it only gives you a 30-minute free trial. It counts the 2 minutes of ads you have to watch every 5 to 10 minutes as watch time. And either the clip with Dionysus is less than 10 seconds long because I had to click through 10-second increments to make the most of my 30-minute free trials, or it's been totally scrubbed from the opening ceremony. I don't know. I ran out of browsers to test this on, and it makes you watch so many ads that I simply couldn't look any further. But I had to see what the fuss was all about, and I was able to find this clip. Apparently Christians are feeling really attacked right now because they think it's a parody making fun of Jesus for some reason. Parody is defined as an imitation of the style of a particular writer, artist, or genre with deliberate exaggeration for comic effect. But this performance definitely wasn't meant to be comic. I mean, it's an homage to Dionysus, and the Olympics Twitter page has even said that this performance is a commentary on the absurdity of violence between human beings. And the song that Philippe Catherine sings is literally about how there would be no wars or violence if we were all just naked. And like, I've heard of white Jesus, black Jesus, Jewish Jesus, and we all know that Jesus was a Palestinian Jewish dude, but I've never heard of blue Jesus. These US Christians are also extremely offended because they believe that the first part of the skit parodies the Last Supper. They don't even care about the beheaded of Marie Antoinette, or the statues moving in the Louvre, or about Snoop Dogg, or the Minions? Did you guys know that there was minions in this? I didn't know that there were minions. Or the fact that Israel was allowed to compete despite openly committing a genocide, or Beyonce's weird interlude, or Lady Gaga, who is also openly queer, but apparently feminine enough that it's okay and not outrageous somehow. Or the fact that the surfing portion of these Olympics took place in Tahiti, which is still a French territory for some reason. And where was the Christian outrage at this Last Supper parody that came out in 2009?
Hey, what's the matter, Kyle? You seem bummed out. I just have a feeling this might be the last time we get to do this. Well, don't worry, Kyle. We're not gonna let people kill you. We'll keep you hidden forever. I can't just hide my whole life, Butters. And besides, I have this strange feeling that one of you is gonna totally betray me.
Oh right, they don't like this particular one because they think it's gay, because we have a new moral panic about the gays on our hands. Although this same outraged demographic literally didn't care at all about the drag queens playing homage to the 1994 Australian film Priscilla Queen of the Desert at the 2000 Sydney Olympics closing ceremony, or Kylie Minogue singing ABBA in a pink showgirl outfit. Like, girl, that is some of the gayest shit I've ever seen. You're telling me that's not gay? That's gay. And why are people so full of outrage? I mean, right now everything is super expensive compared to before due to corporate price gouging, which you may know as inflation, but it's actually corporate price gouging. Many people are struggling to get by, and despite being more connected than ever before thanks to the internet, we are also lonelier than ever and growing more and more alienated from ourselves, our own human essence, and our fellow human beings each passing day. We're also alienated from our labor and the fruits of our labor, which also contributes to feeling like garbage, obviously. As you may know, we in the US, and pretty much the rest of the West, live under capitalism, the private ownership of the means of production, which incentivizes competition rather than cooperation and thus leads to the aforementioned alienation. Typically, when the capitalist economic system undergoes one of its crises or downturns, or whatever you want to call it, which happens about every 4 to 6 years, give or take a few, which you literally learn about during 401k presentations in my experience, and the presenters always act as if it's a totally cool and normal thing. These economic downturns often breed fear and rage among the populace, rightfully so, because potentially losing your life savings, or your job, or your house, or not being able to afford food, or send your kids to college, or whatever, due to economic turmoil is stressful and something a lot of people have to deal with when one of these economic crises or downturns occurs. Unfortunately, because capitalism doesn't like it when we know what capitalism is, it's the private ownership of the means of production, because otherwise we might do something about it. Most people don't understand that the root cause of their suffering is literally just the capitalist economic system making their life feel increasingly precarious and unstable. I mean, it sucks to have one person, or maybe like a board of directors, be in charge of how you spend at least 40 hours of your week, and to feel like your job security depends on that one person seeing you as human, which they often don't, because that's not profitable. It sucks to not know if your hard work will be enough to feed your family next week. It sucks to not know if you'll be able to afford rent next month due to some circumstances outside of your control. Some people turn that feeling of suck inward and end up depressed, anxious, or even chronically ill due to the constant stress, which is a whole problem in and of itself. Others turn it outward and instead direct their fear and rage at literally anyone that they see as an other or less than, which is exactly what's happening here, although these people are also likely full of self-loathing, because happy people who love themselves simply don't feel compelled to turn their fear and rage outward like that. Or inward, honestly. Happy people who love themselves probably have a community that helps them deal with their fear and rage, and helps them process them so that they don't become a problem. They also tend to believe that those others are getting more than their fair share, even though other people's successes or ability to attain resources doesn't actually prevent your success or your ability to attain resources. And the only reason anyone thinks that is because capitalism, the private ownership of the means of production, quite literally incentivizes competition rather than cooperation, which seeps into all aspects of our lives, not just the economic ones, and makes us believe that we must compete to have our needs met. We actually don't need to if society was just structured better. If we had collective ownership of the means of production, it would not be like that. This pattern of economic turmoil leading to reactionary tendencies within a populace is also exactly what happened in 1930s Germany when the Nazis took power and sought to violently push any group they considered undesirable out of public life, including queer people who many of the reactionaries of today also find objectionable and unworthy of participating in public life. Prior to the Nazis taking power, gender was increasingly becoming seen as expansive among the German public, particularly in Berlin, which was home to a number of gender-expansive celebrities and to gay Jewish sexologist Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Science, which pioneered research and treatment for various gender and sexuality-related matters. Even in the US, drag queen Julian Eltinge had starred in several early Hollywood films, and US newspapers reported on the story of Lily Elba, the first trans woman to receive gender-affirming bottom surgery, with headlines like, "The astounding case of the man who was changed into a woman." But the Nazis, who wanted to force people to procreate and who conflated queerness and transness with abortion and antinatalism, obviously didn't like that. In 1933, shortly after taking power, the Nazis launched the Campaign for a Clean Reich, in which they raided dozens of queer bars, forced 3 major queer advocacy groups to disband, shut down queer newspapers, and removed literature covering gender and sexuality from bookstores. Nazis also looted Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Science and burned many books about queerness, transness, sexuality, all those things that Nazis find objectionable. Michael Waters writes about this in his 2004 book, The Other Olympians, Fascism, Queerness, and the Making of Modern Sports, which I use as a source a lot in this video. Women who looked too masculine, especially those with short haircuts, were labeled un-German, and trans and intersex people were judged to be asocial. People on the margins of gender and sexuality were arrested, imprisoned, and at times dispatched to their deaths. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Also, the backlash to this maybe 15-second bit of the 3-hour-long opening ceremony is so goofy and really giving, oh no, people living their lives in a way that I wouldn't. This is so offensive to me, the only person in the world that matters. And to that I have to say, sorry, pal. Sometimes not everything is to your taste, and that's okay. Welcome to my world. I hate most things. It's really not that hard to deal with, honestly. Not everything will be for you or represent you, and it's not supposed to because other people also exist. And they are different from you, and that's okay. We're all individuals and meant to be differentiated from one another. We should be different, actually. According to show organizers and art experts, that skit was also not even meant to parody The Last Supper, but it was actually inspired by artist Jan van Baelert's painting titled The Feast of the Gods, featuring the Feast of Dionysus. You know, Dionysus, the ancient Greek god from the ancient Greek pantheon of gods. And probably one of the coolest Greek gods, in my opinion, with some of the best boons in Hades. But you know, ancient Greece, the place where the first ever Olympics ever were held. More specifically, the all-male, all-nude Olympics, where girls weren't even allowed. The original Olympics were probably even gayer than these Olympics because all those beefy dudes were just wrestling in the nude with their schlongs swinging around and reading poetry in the nude with their schlongs swinging around and like throwing a discus and a shot put and I don't know, what else did they do in the Olympics? Probably jumping hurdles. Like there's just a lot of schlong swinging going on, okay? And after the competitions, they'd probably have wine together and each other in the asses while laughing about how much they hate their wives. Typical bro stuff, you know? Back when men were men. Ancient Greece was honestly pretty whack, though. Not because of the gay stuff. The gay stuff is probably one of the coolest things about it, let's be real. But if anything, we should be offended because less than a minute of this 3-hour-long opening ceremony was queer-coded, and that's just unrealistic when the entire original Olympics was gay. Or like, I don't know, the ancient Olympics were held in honor of Zeus, so we could also be outraged by the fact that it's glorifying Dionysus and not Zeus. But that requires knowledge of history and ancient Greek mythology to be outraged by, so I guess that's not happening. Also, a lot of Christian imagery and aesthetics come from pre-Christian pagan religions because it's easier to convert a pagan population when you take some of their traditional customs and attach them to Christian figures. So of course there's bound to be some aesthetic similarities, like Jesus wears a loincloth and so does Dionysus. Although wearing the same outfit doesn't make you the same person. And they both have, like, crowns, but, like, I'm pretty sure Dionysus had, like, a flower crown, and Jesus has a crown of thorns, which are, like, not the same vibe at all. Also, like, why would the Olympics want to make fun of Jesus? Christianity is a huge religion, and I doubt they'd want to alienate an entire group of people. Which is why the organizers of the Olympics have apologized and apparently scrubbed the video from the internet. But wow, people are really outraged by queerness. I wonder how this started. But first, let's talk about some more outrage about perceived queerness. 2. Weewoo, weewoo, gender police! You've likely heard of Algerian boxer Imane Khelif, who won the Olympic boxing gold medal, congrats to her. And what you've heard depends on where you get your news from. And somehow the same people who falsely believe that people in majority Muslim Palestine throw gay people off of buildings also think that majority Muslim Algeria would send a trans woman to the Olympics. Make it make sense. After Imane Khelif absolutely wrecked Italian cop who benches like 10 pounds, Angela Carini, at the who can punch the other person the hardest portion of the Olympics, outraged right-wingers started to accuse Khelif of being a man, citing that she failed an unspecified gender eligibility test from the IBA in 2023. Not only do we not know what that means, because there's lots of different types of gender tests, like testosterone level testing, visual inspections, physical examination, and gynecological examination. There's also chromatin testing, which was originally introduced at the Mexico City Olympic Games in 1968, then fell out of favor and stopped being used in the 90s until recently. because it's not a very reliable test and kept providing false negative and false positive results, or SRY gene testing, which also poses similar issues. Simpson et al. Points out some of the problems of these gender tests in their 1993 paper, Gender Verification in Competitive Sports, stating that a major problem with sex chromatin testing is that there exist phenotypic females with male sex chromatin patterns, e.g., androgen insensitivity, XY gonadal dysgenesis. These individuals have no athletic advantage as a result of their congenital abnormality, and reasonably should not be excluded from competition. That is, only the chromosomal, genetic sex is analyzed by sex chromatin testing, not the anatomical or psychosocial status. For all the above reasons, sex chromatin testing unfairly excludes many athletes. SRY gene testing poses similar issues. All these problems remain with the current laboratory-based gender verification test, polymerase chain reaction-based testing of the SRY gene, the main candidate for male sex determination. Thus, this advance, in fact, still fails to address the fundamental inequities of laboratory-based gender verification tests. So as you can see, there's a lot of different ways to test someone's gender, none of which are consistently reliable or valid, and we have no clue what sort of test Imane Khelif supposedly failed. Someone could have looked at her and thought, she's too masked to be a lady, and counted that as failing a gender test. Someone at the lab could have messed up a sex chromatin test and wrongly designated her as XY. Maybe she has PCOS and has too high of testosterone as a result. Who knows? We sure don't. And who cares? That's between her and her medical team. All we know is that she was assigned female at birth, was raised and socialized as a girl, lives life as a cis woman today, and competes in women's boxing, so she is in fact a woman, a cis woman, even though trans women are real women, actually. Unless your definition of woman only includes white Western women. White Western cis women. Straight ones at that. Able-bodied too, as is the case with many of these reactionaries. That's why despite loads of evidence showing that Imane Khelif is not transgender, these outraged reactionaries are still convinced that she's not a real woman. Also, that 1993 article's abstract starts off with the possibility that men might masquerade as women and be unfair competitors in women's sports is accepted as outrageous by athletes and the public alike. Oh, how times have changed. For the worse. Like, damn, maybe 1993 was a better time. I don't know, I was a baby. And it honestly kind of sucked where I was. But at least this peer-reviewed article knew it was up, so why are we now in a place where that actually is seen as a concern? 3. The origin of gender policing in women's sports. This concern over men infiltrating women's sports was first seen during the 1934 Women's World Games in London, when South African coach Bertie C. Sims called for British colonial South Africa to withdraw its participation because he thought that some of the women who were winning were suspiciously mannish. His claim effectively gave birth to the gender surveillance discourse that we're still dealing with today, although there have been ebbs and flows of how much gender surveillance is applied at any point in time, usually depending on how the economy is doing, because again, poor material conditions lead to reactionary tendencies in the populace when they don't know to blame capitalism and instead blame a minority group that actually has no power over them. Or over, society really at all. Though Sims didn't explicitly name the athletes he considered mannish, it's likely that one of the athletes he was referring to was Czech athlete Zdeněk Kubík. Kubík participated in the Women's World Games that year as a woman, winning 2 medals, and transitioned shortly afterwards, living the rest of his life as a man, with newspapers worldwide covering his story and catapulting him into celebrity. He even performed on Broadway and danced in Paris with Josephine Baker. I love that for him. However, stories like Kubík's caused outrage among reactionary sports officials and sports journalists who were afraid that these trans men were secretly going to compete as women and ruin women's sports for all the dainty women who simply couldn't compete against these big, buff, scary men. Even though these trans men who transitioned after winning these athletic competitions, like Kubík and Mark Weston, a track and field athlete who also competed in women's sports but transitioned to male after retiring from athletics, did not actually want to compete as women because they were men. They wanted to live as men. They didn't want to compete as women. And they weren't competing as women post-transition. But that didn't stop reactionaries from using them as examples of scary men infiltrating women's games to push their own agendas. After the 1934 World Women's Games, where this gender panic discourse was born, the next Olympics took place in Nazi Germany in 1936, who of course took advantage of the gender panic. Nazi sports doctor Wilhelm Noll lobbied officials to mandate gender checks of female athletes to stop all these fake women from infiltrating women's sports. According to Michael Waters, Noll and the Nazis weren't the only ones campaigning for sex examinations. The need for sex testing became a particular topic of fascination among fascists in Europe, whose embrace of eugenics made them naturally suspicious of trans people, intersex people, and really any woman they deemed too masculine. An Italian fascist newspaper suggested that medical exams could protect athletes from future unpleasant surprises of the kind brought up in this case by the gender switch of a woman. In 1936, right before the Olympics, Avery Brundage, then president of the United States Olympic Committee, forwarded an anonymous sports fan letter stating that a famous female athlete wasn't really a woman to two Olympic executives, and added his own 2 cents, stating that it might be well to insist on a medical examination before participation in the Olympic Games. Brundage had also visited Germany shortly before the Olympics to make sure there wasn't anything sketchy going on that would make it unsuitable of the Olympics, and upon finding out that Jewish athletes were only allowed to train in Jewish sports clubs, he said, "In my club in Chicago, Jews are not permitted either." Of course, the anti-Semite, who believed that sports were the most democratic thing in the world and that athletes shouldn't be paid for their labor, ideologically aligned with Nazis. No surprise there. According to Michael Waters, in pushing forward sex testing policies, Brundage was doing something radical, taking a concept of sex that even medical professionals had not resolved and enshrining it into institutional policy. And thus, sports became the platform for sex sorting almost accidentally, driven by a misguided fear of women's sports as inherently delicate. Several months later, Brundage's suggestion, which again was ideologically aligned with fascists, became official policy, and the International Amateur Athletic Federation, which is now known as World Athletics, passed a rule at the Berlin Olympics allowing for medical examinations of women who were deemed too masculine. So in a weird way, the Nazis and their eugenicist fascist ideology is responsible for the gender discourse of today. It's honestly wild how much of a cultural impact Nazis have had on the West, even to this day, because the West never really denazified. Thanks, I hate it. This gender panic and accusations of women athletes actually being men ramped up further during the Cold War, in part because women from the Soviet Union were doing too well during the Olympics and other athletic events. Yeah. Wow, all of these reactionary things are just Nazis and anti-communism. What's up with that? And like racism and misogyny and transmisogyny and ableism and white supremacy, and it's a mess, honestly. And capitalism helps perpetuate all that. In Sex Testing, Gender Policing in Women's Sports, Lindsay Parks Piper writes that the Cold War exacerbated earlier sex/gender concerns and resulted in a mandatory examination for all female track and field competitors, especially in the wake of Soviet women's remarkable achievements in athletics. Sport authorities grew increasingly worried that powerful female athletes were either unnaturally inauthentic women, men posing as women, or dopers. Using the USSR women as scapegoats, the International Association of Athletics Federation established tests to eliminate all three categories and delineate true womanhood. In 1966, the Federation introduced a nude parade, the first compulsory sex test of modern sport. Yikes. And this gender policing has only ramped up since. In 2009, South African cis-woman Caster Semenya was accused of being a man after winning the 2009 World Championships, and as a result was subjected to 6 months of sex testing to establish her abnormalities and prescribe the appropriate treatment. She described the entire ordeal as the most profound and humiliating experience of my life. From 2010 to 2015, she had to take testosterone-suppressing oral contraceptives to lower her testosterone, which led to weight gain, constant sickness, regular fevers, and internal abdominal pain. As of 2019, the IAAF, now World Athletics, put new rules into place that would force athletes like Semenya, who has been diagnosed with 46XY differences of sexual development as the cause of her high testosterone levels, to take testosterone suppressants. So, Semenya has not competed since. She hopes to compete again and has filed a series of legal cases to allow her to compete in these events without testosterone suppression. It's actually totally reasonable to want to compete without having to take pharmaceuticals that make you feel terrible. Like, hello, bodily autonomy? In 2012, 16-year-old Chinese swimmer Ye Shiwan, who won gold for the 200-meter and 400-meter individual medley events at the 2012 London Olympics, was also accused of either being a man or doping, particularly because she swam faster than the winning male swimmer, American Ryan Lochte, during the final lap of the 400-meter event. Veteran American swim coach John Leonard accused her of not showing a normal improvement curve, stating that a woman does not outswim the fastest man in the world in the back quarter of a 400-meter individual medley that is otherwise quite ordinary. It just doesn't happen, insinuating that she was either doping or not a real woman. Serena Williams, who won the Australian Open while pregnant, has also been accused of being a man, and countless other black women like Michelle Obama and Megan Thee Stallion have also been accused of being men. Yeah, it turns out this transphobic, misogynistic, transmisogynistic discourse is deeply rooted in white supremacy and ableism, and the idea that deviating from some preset norm that's rooted in whiteness is bad. Normality isn't even real anyway, it's just a form of social control. 4. Conclusion. In conclusion, blame the transphobic gender discourse on the Nazis. Also, this Olympics has truly held up a mirror to society and revealed many of its problems that I think a lot of us knew were problems, but now it's just more obvious and in your face than before. Particularly the fact that many reactionaries are insistent on policing gender and queerness in a way that's strikingly similar to the Nazis in the 1930s, and shows the fact that fascism is propagating amongst the general public due to economic turmoil. We also see how easily outraged the reactionary elements in society are becoming, and how the slightest hint of perceived queerness or perceived difference really sets them off and leads them into a hateful frenzy as the pain they constantly feel from existing under late-stage capitalism comes to a head upon witnessing the mere existence of a person that's different from them. As James Baldwin wrote in The Fire Next Time, I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is because they sense, once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain. And it's true, these outraged reactionaries are truly so sad, and so lost in their own pain and grief, unsure of how to alchemize it for healing themselves and improving the world. They feel the problems and pain of the world in their bodies, as we all do because we're part of the same human species, but they don't love themselves or the collective, so they don't know what to do about that pain and thus look for an external source to blame. Anything that shocks them, anything that makes them feel, anything reminding them that other types of people exist, and anything reminding them that their way of life isn't the only way of life. They think of the other as a personal threat and believe that the other is what makes them feel the pain of the world through their body, even though, like, that's just a feature of being a human, you know, and none of us are free until all of us are free. And they believe that the other is depriving them of what they need. They think the other is why they're alienated from others or in a financially precarious situation. They don't recognize that it's simply capitalism working as intended that is the cause of their suffering. And the entire point of existing as an individual who is a part of humanity is to serve humanity in whatever way you can without getting caught in the illusion of our own separateness. I mean, we are one humanity, right? How can you serve when you are a victim of your own fear and outrage like that? When you demonize what you don't understand and thus demonize and exile the parts of yourself that you don't understand and refuse to acknowledge or learn about? When you can't even correctly name the cause of that fear and outrage? When anything that isn't to your tastes is taken as a personal slight, and when you believe that you as an individual have a higher understanding in matters of taste than any other individual? Not everything is for everyone. I'm sure it hurts when the thing you thought would be for you isn't what you wanted, but it's just so sad and honestly pathetic to see these sad people lost in their own false consciousness, believing that their manufactured outrage is truly them thinking about something deep and meaningful when it's anything but that.
To make people think in America is an extremely difficult job. We live in a capitalist system which seeks to exploit the people and therefore keep the people confused. The capitalist system makes the people think they're thinking when in fact they are not thinking. And it is extremely difficult to convince someone who thinks he's thinking that he's not thinking.
And as we learned earlier, this is a part of how fascism spreads. Policing gender and queerness, alienating and isolating ourselves from one another, othering those who are not exactly like us, blaming those others for our problems, and forcing a culture war rather than focusing on the very real class war. which is the cause of all of our problems, by the way. If you want to stop fascism, then study the ideology of the people who have historically stopped fascism and use that to inform your actions. Love yourself and love your community and love the collective. I'm pretty sure that Jesus dude said that, actually. Not that one. Nope. Nope. Exactly. Because the only way we can defeat fascism is by fighting for something. Fighting for the equality of all humans. Fighting for justice. Fighting for love. I mean, honestly, very fitting with my Sailor Moon shirt. Fighting for socialism, rather than fighting against a really bad thing that you don't like. Fighting against a really bad thing that you don't like and basing your entire ideology simply off of the thing you don't like, rather than on what you are for, is how you end up being a reactionary and falling down a fascist pipeline, so don't do that. And learn who you are and where your unique strengths and talents lie so you can best serve the collective and use your precious life to improve things for everyone. And remember that you are also a part of that everyone, so by working towards improving things for everyone, you are also working towards improving things for you. Think about the world you want to fight for and start by resolving the contradictions all around you and within you, because revolution means solving contradictions. Thanks for watching! This video was made possible by my amazing patrons on Patreon. If you like my videos and want me to continue making them, consider joining for ad-free, uncensored videos, behind-the-scenes content, and monthly Patreon-exclusive videos. You can also send me a one-time tip on Ko-fi or PayPal. And make sure you like this video, subscribe to my channel, share this with a friend if you feel compelled. All the things, it really helps. I post new videos every other Sunday, typically, although this one is late. I followed off. I'm getting back on it though. See you in the next one. Bye for now.